Bikers harass farmer's daughter, but her father's hidden past leaves them stunned. Welcome to a tale of courage, mystery, and the hidden strength that lies within the most unexpected places. This is the story of Sarah, a spirited young woman from the quiet town of Willow Creek, and her father, Ethan, a man whose past harbored secrets that no one in the town could have ever imagined. When a group of rowdy bikers known as the Black Hounds roars into their small town gas station, it sparks a series of events that unveil Ethan's long-buried past and test the bonds of family and integrity. Through 5 thrilling chapters, you'll witness how bravery, respect, and a steadfast commitment to what's right can overcome even the most menacing challenges. Buckle up, because this is a ride you won't want to miss. The sun dipped low over the horizon, painting the skies of Willow Creek in shades of amber and crimson. Sarah Miller, 19 years old and fiercely independent, stood in the gravel lot of her family's small gas station on the edge of town. She had just finished unloading a few crates of soda from their pickup truck. The summer heat clung to the air, making every task feel heavier than it was. But Sarah didn't mind. She was used to hard work. It was all she'd ever known growing up in this quiet, tucked-away corner of Texas. Her father, Ethan Miller, stood by the gas pump, refueling the truck and wiping his calloused hands on a rag. In his late 50s, Ethan was a man of few words but immense presence. His weathered face and broad shoulders spoke of a life well lived, and perhaps one filled with stories he never told. To Sarah, he was her rock, the man who had single-handedly raised her after her mother passed away when she was only a toddler. As Sarah wiped the sweat from her brow, a distant rumble caught her attention. At first, it was faint, blending into the usual hum of summer cicadas. But as it grew louder, a gnawing sense of unease prickled at the back of her neck. She turned her gaze to the dusty road that wound into town. What she saw made her stomach twist. A pack of motorcycles, engines roaring, thundered toward the gas station. There were at least 6 of them, their chrome frames glinting in the setting sun. The riders were clad in black leather, their jackets bearing the insignia of a snarling wolf's head. The Black Hounds. Sarah had heard of them before. Stories about their antics made their way through town whenever they passed through. Vandalism, intimidation, and a general air of menace. They weren't locals, and thankfully, they rarely stuck around. But today, it seemed, they had decided to make a stop. The bikers pulled into the gas station lot, their machines growling like restless predators. Gravel crunched beneath their tires as they came to a halt. One by one, they dismounted, their heavy boots hitting the ground with thuds that echoed in the quiet air. Sarah felt her heart quicken. She glanced at her father, who was still focused on refueling the truck. "Dad," she said, her voice low but urgent. Ethan didn't look up. "Stay calm, Sarah," he replied, his tone steady. "Let's not assume trouble unless it finds us." The leader of the group, a burly man with a shaved head and a beard peppered with gray, approached first. His jacket bore the name, Rex, stitched in bold letters. He pulled off his sunglasses, revealing cold, piercing eyes that scanned the gas station with an air of disdain. Well, Rex drawled, his voice rough and dripping with mockery. "What do we have here? A little slice of country life." His gaze landed on Sarah, and a slow, predatory grin spread across his face. "Hey there, sweetheart," he called, his voice carrying a tone that made her skin crawl. "Don't tell me you're out here all alone. This place could use some excitement, don't you think?" The rest of the gang laughed, their voices rough and raucous. Sarah squared her shoulders, refusing to let fear show. We're just trying to mind our own business, she said evenly, her eyes meeting Rex's. Rex chuckled, a low, menacing sound. Oh, don't be like that. We're just here to fuel up and have a little fun. Ain't that right, boys? The group hollered in agreement, their laughter echoing in the open air. Ethan finally turned around, his steady gaze locking onto Rex. He didn't say a word, but the shift in his posture was unmistakable. Is there a problem here? Ethan asked, his voice calm yet carrying a weight that made the laughter falter for just a moment. Rex turned to him, his grin unfazed. No problem, old man. Just introducing ourselves to the locals. You got an issue with that? Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped closer to Sarah, positioning himself between her and the gang. This is my daughter, he said simply, and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave her be. The tension thickened as Rex studied Ethan, his grin faltering slightly. You've got guts. I'll give you that, Rex said, but guts only get you so far. The gang began to fan out, their movements slow and deliberate, like wolves circling their prey. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she glanced at her father. He stood tall and steady, his presence a stark contrast to the chaos brewing around them. And that was when she realized, Ethan wasn't just calm. He was prepared. What Rex and his gang didn't know was that Ethan Miller had a past, one filled with skills and experiences that would make him the last man they should ever underestimate. The storm was coming, and Willow Creek would never be the same. The air around the gas station was suffocatingly tense, the gravel crunching beneath the boots of the black hounds as they moved like vultures circling their prey. Sarah's breath quickened, though she tried to appear calm. Her father, Ethan, remained immovable, his weathered face giving away nothing but a quiet intensity. Your daughter's got some spunk, Rex said, his tone a mix of amusement and menace. I like that. It's rare around these parts. Ethan's jaw tightened, though his expression remained stoic. She's not part of whatever you're looking for here. Fill your tanks and move on. Rex's grin widened. We'll leave when we're good and ready. Old man, but since you're so protective, why don't you tell us what you're hiding? Something about you smells like a man with stories. The words hung in the air, an unspoken challenge. Sarah couldn't help but glance at her father, her mind racing. She had always known there was more to Ethan than the quiet farmer he pretended to be. He avoided talking about his past, dismissing her questions with vague answers or abrupt changes in subject. But now, under the scrutiny of these bikers, there was a shift in his demeanor, a subtle but unmistakable crack in his calm exterior. I don't owe you a thing, Ethan said, his voice steady but firm. This is my property, and I'd like you to respect it. Rex took a step closer, his boots crunching against the gravel. Respect's earned, not demanded. Why don't you tell us about those hands of yours? Old man, they don't look like they've just been digging in dirt. They've seen something rougher. Ethan didn't flinch, but Sarah noticed his fists curling slightly. Dad, she whispered, barely audible. It's fine, Sarah, Ethan replied without turning, his voice calm. But it wasn't fine. The bikers were closing in, their laughter growing louder, their confidence swelling. Here's the deal, Rex said, leaning in slightly. We've got a long ride ahead of us, and we're feeling a bit parched. Why don't you send the little lady inside to grab us some drinks? Call it being neighborly. Sarah's heart pounded. She opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan spoke first. She's not going anywhere, he said, his voice sharp enough to cut through the humid air. Rex straightened, the amusement draining from his face. He glanced back at his gang, then returned his gaze to Ethan. Well, Rex said, his tone darker now. "Looks like we've got ourselves a tough guy." "That's the thing about tough guys, they're usually all talk." The gang chuckled. A low, menacing sound. One of the bikers, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward. "Maybe we should show him what happens when you don't play nice." The man sneered, his voice dripping with malice. Before anyone could move, Ethan raised a hand, not in surrender, but in a gesture that commanded attention. "Let me save you some time," Ethan said, his voice low and deliberate. "You're not the first to think you can push me around. And you won't be the last. But let me give you some advice. The moment you underestimate a man willing to protect his family, you've already lost." The bikers exchanged glances, their smirks faltering. There was something in Ethan's voice, something cold and certain, that seemed to cut through their bravado. "Big words," Rex said, though there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "But words don't mean much without action." Ethan's lips tightened into a thin line. He slowly removed the rag from his back pocket, tossing it onto the truck bed. His movements were deliberate, calculated. "I don't want trouble," Ethan said, taking a step forward. "But if you force my hand, you'll regret it." Sarah watched in stunned silence. She had never seen her father like this. He wasn't just defending her, he was sending a message. One that even the bikers seemed to understand. The scar-faced man sneered. "You think you're a badass, old man?" Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he met the man's gaze. Unblinking, unwavering, it was as if he could see through him, past the tattoos and leather, straight to the core of his being. Scarface hesitated. It was only for a second, but it was enough to shift the energy. Rex noticed it too, his expression darkening. "Enough of this," Rex snapped. "Let's see what you've got, old man." He reached for Sarah's arm, his movements quick and aggressive. But before he could make contact, Ethan moved. It happened in an instant. Ethan's hand shot out, grabbing Rex's wrist with a grip so strong it made the biker wince. In one fluid motion, Ethan twisted Rex's arm and forced him to his knees. The sound of gravel scraping against denim filling the air. The gang erupted into chaos. But Ethan didn't flinch. He released Rex, stepping back and positioning himself between the gang and Sarah. "Leave now," Ethan said, his voice calm but commanding. For a moment, no one moved. The bikers seemed stunned, their arrogance replaced by confusion. Rex struggled to his feet, his eyes filled with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You don't know who you're messing with," Rex snarled, his voice trembling. Ethan met his gaze, unyielding. "Neither do you." The silence was deafening. Sarah felt like she was holding her breath, waiting for the next move. But to her surprise, Rex motioned to his gang. "Let's go," he barked, his voice tight with anger. One by one, the bikers mounted their motorcycles, their engines roaring to life. They peeled out of the gas station, a cloud of dust and exhaust trailing behind them. As the sound of the motorcycles faded, Sarah turned to her father, her voice shaky. "Dad, what just happened?" Ethan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "It's over, Sarah, that's what matters." But Sarah knew it wasn't over. Not really. The way her father had moved, the way he had spoken, it was like he had stepped into a role he hadn't played in years. And she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The following morning, the air in Willow Creek was heavy with an uneasy quiet. The townsfolk had already begun whispering about the bikers at the gas station, their version of events growing more elaborate with each retelling. But at the Miller household, the tension was not something that could be dismissed with gossip. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cup of lukewarm coffee. Across from her, Ethan quietly read the local paper, the creases in his brow deeper than usual. She studied him, noticing the faint tremor in his hand as he turned the page. "What happened yesterday, Dad?" Sarah finally asked, breaking the silence. Ethan didn't look up. "We handled it, that's all that matters." "Don't give me that," Sarah snapped, surprising even herself with the sharpness of her tone. "The way you moved, the way you talked to them, it wasn't normal. You're not just a farmer. Who are you, really?" Ethan's hand stilled, his eyes meeting hers for a long, heavy moment. He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "There are things in my past I've chosen not to talk about. Things I hoped you'd never have to know." "Dad," Sarah said, her voice softening, "I think I deserve to know. Especially now." Ethan set the paper aside, rubbing a hand over his face. "I wasn't always Ethan Miller, the farmer," he began. "Before this life, I was Captain Ethan Cross, a Marine." Sarah's eyes widened. She had suspected something, but hearing it confirmed left her momentarily speechless. "I served for 15 years. Ethan continued, his voice low, "deployed to places that most people can't even imagine. I've seen war, Sarah. I've seen what people are capable of when they're desperate, scared, or angry. And I've done things I'm not proud of." Sarah's mind raced with questions, but one stuck out above the rest. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because I wanted to leave it behind," Ethan said, his gaze steady. "When your mother and I moved here, it was supposed to be a fresh start. After she passed, I made it my mission to protect you from everything, including the man I used to be." But yesterday, Sarah trailed off, the memory of his swift takedown of Rex still fresh in her mind. "You didn't hesitate, because I knew what kind of men they were," Ethan said. "Bullies, predators. I've dealt with their type before. And I wasn't about to let them hurt you." Sarah nodded slowly, trying to process this new side of her father. "Do you think they'll come back?" Ethan hesitated, his jaw tightening. Men like Rex don't take kindly to being humiliated. "If they do come back, we'll deal with it." Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself in town, running errands. The small community of Willow Creek buzzed with its usual activity, locals chatting on porches, shopkeepers arranging their displays, and children playing in the dusty streets. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As she walked out of the hardware store, a familiar sound reached her ears, the low, growling rumble of motorcycle engines. Her stomach dropped. Turning toward the noise, she saw them, the black hounds, parked just outside the diner. Rex stood at the forefront, leaning against his bike, his gaze scanning the street. When his eyes landed on Sarah, his expression shifted into a predatory smirk. He said something to his gang, and they began moving toward her. "Hey there, sweetheart," Rex called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "Fancy seeing you here." Sarah froze for a moment before forcing herself to move, gripping her shopping bags tightly as she started walking in the opposite direction. "Where are you going?" Rex taunted, his boots crunching against the dirt road as he followed her. "We're not done with you and your old man." The gang closed in, their laughter echoing in the quiet street. Sarah's heart pounded as she quickened her pace, silently cursing herself for not bringing the truck. She turned a corner, her mind racing for a solution, when she collided with someone. "Whoa there," came a gruff but familiar voice. She looked up to see Sheriff Hank Talbot, the town's no-nonsense lawman. His sharp eyes immediately locked onto the approaching bikers. "Everything okay here, Miss Miller?" Hank asked, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. Sarah exhaled a shaky breath. "They've been following me," Hank turned his gaze to Rex and his crew, his expression hardening. "Is that so?" Rex chuckled, raising his hands in mock innocence. "Just a friendly chat, Sheriff. No harm intended." "Well, consider the chat over," Hank said, his tone firm. "You're not welcome here. Get back on your bikes and ride out." Rex's smirk faltered, but he didn't argue. With a sharp whistle, he signaled his gang to retreat. They mounted their motorcycles, their engines roaring as they peeled out of town. Hank turned to Sarah, his expression softening. "You all right?" "Yeah," Sarah said, though her voice wavered. "Thanks, Sheriff. You tell your father to keep his guard up." Hank said, "Something tells me those boys aren't done yet." That evening, back at the gas station, Sarah relayed the encounter to Ethan. He listened quietly, his expression growing darker with each word. "They're testing us," Ethan said finally, trying to see how far they can push before we break. "What do we do?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stood, his movements deliberate. "We prepare." For the first time, Sarah saw her father not as the quiet, reserved man who raised her, but as the soldier he had once been. And though it filled her with a strange sense of security, it also made her realize that the storm wasn't over, it was just beginning. The night descended over Willow Creek with a heavy stillness. But inside the Miller household, tension buzzed like a live wire. Ethan stood at the dining table, spreading out an old, weathered map of their property. Sarah watched him from across the room, her heart pounding as she tried to reconcile the man before her with the father she had always known. "What's the plan, Dad?" Sarah asked, her voice quieter than she intended. Ethan glanced up at her, his expression resolute. "We don't know when or how they'll come back, but we can be sure they will. And when they do, we need to be ready." He pointed to the map. "This is the perimeter of the gas station and the house. We have clear sight lines from here to here," he said, tracing his finger along the edges of the property. "If they try to approach on bikes, we'll see them coming." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. "You're acting like this is a battlefield." Ethan paused, his gaze softening as he looked at her. "Because it might be. I've seen men like Rex before. They won't take their humiliation lightly. But I need you to trust me." "Sarah." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "What do we do?" Ethan began gathering supplies, a flashlight, a length of rope, a heavy wrench, and placed them on the table. "We reinforce the doors and windows. Keep the lights off at night. And stay alert. You'll stay inside, no matter what happens." "And you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "I'll be here," Ethan said firmly, protecting what matters most. The next morning, Sarah woke to the sound of hammering. She found Ethan outside, boarding up the windows of the gas station. His movements were methodical, almost mechanical, as if he had done this 100 times before. She stepped outside, the early morning air cool against her skin. "Do you think this will stop them?" she asked. "It's not about stopping them," Ethan replied without pausing. "It's about slowing them down. Buying us time." Sarah crossed her arms, frustration bubbling to the surface. "This isn't normal, Dad. This isn't how people live." Ethan set the hammer down and turned to her. "Normal doesn't matter right now. Keeping you safe does." She wanted to argue, to push back against the walls he was metaphorically and literally building around them. But she saw the determination in his eyes. This wasn't a man who would be swayed by fear or doubt. He was a soldier again, even if it was a role he never wanted to revisit. By midday, the preparations were nearly complete. The gas station and house were as fortified as they could make them. Sarah watched from the porch as Ethan surveyed the property. his gaze scanning the horizon like a hawk. "What was it like?" she asked suddenly. Ethan turned to her, his brow furrowing. "What was what like?" "Being a Marine," she said, stepping closer. "Fighting, protecting people." Ethan exhaled, leaning against the porch railing. "It was complicated. There were moments of pride, knowing I was making a difference. But there were also moments I wish I could forget. The things I had to do, the things I saw, they stay with you, no matter how far you run." "Is that why you came here?" Sarah asked. "To escape?" Ethan nodded. "After your mother passed, I realized I couldn't live in that world anymore. I wanted to give you a life far from violence and chaos. But I guess some things find their way back, no matter how hard you try to leave them behind." Sarah reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "You're not in this alone, Dad. We'll face them together." Ethan gave her a small, grateful smile. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah, but I need you to promise me something." "What?" "When they come, you stay inside, no matter what. Do you understand?" Sarah hesitated but eventually nodded. "I understand." As the sun dipped below the horizon, a familiar sound broke the quiet of the evening, the rumble of motorcycle engines. Sarah's heart sank as she and Ethan exchanged a glance. They were back. Ethan moved to the door, grabbing the wrench he had placed there earlier. "Stay here," he instructed, his tone leaving no room for argument. Sarah watched from the window as the headlights of the bikes cut through the darkness, their engines roaring as they pulled into the gas station lot. This time, there were more of them, at least 10 riders, their silhouettes menacing against the dim glow of the streetlights. Rex dismounted first, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Evening, old man," he called out, his voice carrying over the growl of the idling engines. "Miss us?" Ethan stepped forward, his posture steady, his grip on the wrench firm. "I told you to stay away." "And I told you," Rex said, spreading his arms theatrically. "We leave when we're ready." The gang fanned out, their movements deliberate and predatory. Sarah's breath hitched as she watched from her hiding spot, her fingers gripping the edge of the windowsill. She wanted to run outside, to stand beside her father, but his words echoed in her mind, "Stay inside." Rex took another step forward, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? Just an old man clinging to some past glory." Ethan's voice was calm, but the edge in it was unmistakable. "You don't want to do this." "Oh, I think we do," Rex sneered, pulling a crowbar from his bike. "It's time someone put you in your place." As Rex raised the crowbar, Ethan moved. He didn't hesitate, didn't falter, with the precision of a man trained in combat. He sidestepped Rex's swing and struck, the wrench connecting with Rex's arm in a sharp, calculated blow. Rex cried out, dropping the crowbar as he stumbled backward. The gang erupted into chaos. 2 bikers charged forward, but Ethan was ready. He moved with a speed and efficiency that defied his age, taking one down with a swift jab to the ribs and using the other's momentum to throw him to the ground. From the window, Sarah's heart pounded as she watched her father fight. He wasn't just defending himself, he was protecting her, their home, and everything they had built together. But even as Ethan held his ground, the sheer number of bikers threatened to overwhelm him. "Stay down," Ethan barked at one of the fallen bikers, his voice a command that left no room for argument. Rex clutched his arm, his face twisted in pain and rage. "You're gonna pay for that, old man," he spat, motioning for the rest of the gang to advance. Ethan stood firm, his gaze unwavering. "Not tonight." Inside, Sarah's resolve snapped. She couldn't just stand by and watch. She grabbed the flashlight Ethan had left on the counter, flipping it on and aiming it through the window. The sudden beam of light startled the bikers, who shielded their eyes against the glare. "Back off," Sarah shouted, her voice filled with a courage she didn't know she possessed. The distraction was enough. Ethan used the moment to take control, his movements swift and decisive. He disarmed another biker and sent him sprawling to the ground. As the bikers stumbled and regrouped, Rex snarled, "This isn't over." He motioned for the gang to retreat. One by one, they climbed back onto their bikes, engines roaring to life. Sarah opened the door as Ethan walked back toward the house, his shoulders heaving with exertion. "You okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, his face grim. "For now." But as the sound of the motorcycles faded into the night, Sarah knew this wasn't the end. Rex's parting words echoed in her mind. "This isn't over." The hours after the bikers' retreat were tense and sleepless. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, staring at the front door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. Ethan paced the living room, his wrench still clutched in his hand, his jaw set in grim determination. "They'll come back," Sarah said quietly, breaking the silence. Ethan stopped pacing, his eyes meeting hers. "I know, and when they do, we'll end this." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy blanket. There was no doubt in his voice, no hesitation. He wasn't just preparing for another confrontation, he was preparing for the final one. The first light of dawn painted the horizon in hues of orange and pink. Ethan stood outside, surveying the property. He had barricaded the doors, reinforced the windows, and placed improvised traps along the most likely approaches. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Sarah stepped out to join him, clutching a thermos of coffee. "Do you really think they'll try again?" Ethan nodded. "Men like Rex don't know how to back down. Their pride won't let them." As if on cue, the distant growl of motorcycle engines echoed through the still morning air. Sarah's grip tightened on the thermos as she exchanged a glance with her father. "They're here." Ethan turned to her, his expression resolute. "Go inside. Lock the door. Don't come out unless I tell you." "Dad." "Now." "Sarah." She hesitated but finally obeyed, retreating into the house and locking the door behind her. She crouched by the window, peering out as the gang rolled into the gravel lot. This time, there were no games, no taunts. The black hounds dismounted in silence, their faces grim and determined. Rex stepped forward, his injured arm in a makeshift sling. His eyes burned with fury as he glared at Ethan. "You should have stayed down, old man," Rex said, his voice low and venomous. "But now, we're gonna finish this." Ethan stood his ground, his wrench held loosely at his side. "You can leave now, and no one else gets hurt." Rex laughed bitterly. "You think you've won because you got lucky. We don't walk away from a fight." Ethan's expression hardened. "This isn't a fight. It's a mistake. One you don't want to make." Rex motioned to his gang. "Take him." The bikers advanced, their movements coordinated and purposeful. Ethan's grip tightened on the wrench as the first man lunged at him. With a practiced sweep of his arm, Ethan deflected the attack and delivered a sharp blow to the biker's knee, sending him collapsing to the ground. Another rushed in from the side, swinging a chain. Ethan ducked, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting it until the chain clattered to the ground. He followed up with a quick strike to the man's stomach, doubling him over. Inside the house, Sarah's heart pounded as she watched her father fight. He moved with precision and control, his every action deliberate, but there were too many of them, and she could see the toll it was taking on him. "Come on, Dad," she whispered, clutching the edge of the windowsill. Outside, Ethan faced down two more bikers. One threw a punch, but Ethan sidestepped, grabbing the man's arm and using his momentum to throw him into the other attacker. Both hit the ground in a heap. Groaning in pain, Rex stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he sized Ethan up. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he spat. "All you've done is make this worse." Ethan didn't reply. He simply adjusted his stance, ready for whatever was coming next. Rex lunged, swinging a crowbar with his uninjured arm. Ethan blocked it with the wrench, the clash of metal ringing out across the lot. The two men circled each other, their movements measured. "You don't scare me," Rex snarled, swinging again. Ethan ducked under the blow and countered with a strike to Rex's ribs. The biker staggered back, clutching his side, but his fury only grew. "You should have stayed in whatever hole you crawled out of," Rex growled. "Now, I'll make sure you regret it." Ethan didn't answer. He simply waited, his eyes locked on Rex. Inside, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed the heavy flashlight from the counter and unlocked the door, stepping outside just as Rex charged at her father again. "Dad!" she shouted. The distraction was enough. Rex hesitated, glancing towards Sarah, and Ethan seized the opportunity. With a powerful swing, he knocked the crowbar from Rex's hand and kicked it out of reach. Rex stumbled, falling to his knees. Ethan stood over him, his wrench raised, his face hard as stone. The gang watched in stunned silence, none daring to intervene. Even Rex seemed to realize he was beaten. He looked up at Ethan, his expression a mix of rage and fear. "Go ahead," Rex spat. "Finish it." Ethan lowered the wrench, his voice calm but firm. "I'm not like you. Get your men and leave. If I ever see you here again, you won't get a second chance." Rex hesitated, his jaw clenching. Finally, he nodded, signaling to his gang. The bikers helped each other to their feet, limping back to their motorcycles. One by one, they started their engines and roared off into the distance, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. As the silence settled over the lot, Sarah ran to her father, her eyes brimming with tears. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice shaking. Ethan nodded, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's over. You think they'll come back?" Sarah asked. Ethan shook his head. They got the message. For a long moment, they stood there in the quiet dawn, the weight of the ordeal finally lifting. Sarah looked at her father with a newfound sense of awe and respect. "I had no idea you were capable of that," she said. Ethan smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised what a person can do when they're protecting what matters." In the days that followed, the story of Ethan's stand spread through Willow Creek. The townsfolk spoke of him with a mix of admiration and gratitude. And the black hounds were never seen in the area again. For Sarah, the experience was life-changing. She saw her father not just as the man who raised her, but as a protector, a fighter, and a source of unshakable strength. And though their lives returned to the quiet rhythm of the farm and gas station, the bond between them was stronger than ever. Ethan's past had come full circle, and in the end, it wasn't just his skill or experience that won the day. It was his unwavering commitment to what he loved most, his family. As the sun set over Willow Creek, Sarah sat beside her father on the porch, the two of them watching the horizon in peaceful silence. "Do you ever wish things had been different?" Sarah asked softly. Ethan thought for a moment before shaking his head. "No, everything I've been through brought me here, to you, and that's all I've ever needed." The storm had passed, and for the first time in a long while, the future felt bright. As the dust settled and the sun rose over the quiet town of Willow Creek, The Miller family found themselves stronger and closer than ever before. Ethan's past, once hidden, became a symbol of resilience and courage. Sarah's unwavering belief in her father showed the unbreakable bond between them, a reminder that love, trust, and determination can conquer even the darkest of storms. This story isn't just about bravery in the face of danger, it's about standing up for what's right, protecting the ones we love, and finding strength in ourselves when we need it the most. It's a testament to the quiet heroes among us, the ones who don't seek glory but rise to the occasion when it matters most. Now, we want to hear from you. What would you do if faced with a challenge like Ethan and Sarah's? How has this story inspired you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. By subscribing, you'll be the first to hear our newest and most exciting stories, delivered to you for free. Whether you're looking for tales of courage, heartfelt moments, or unexpected twists, this channel is your destination for stories that captivate and inspire. Join our community, and together, let's continue exploring the extraordinary power of ordinary lives. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story. Subscribe now and stay tuned. You won't want to miss what's coming next.